In this demo, we'll implement a simple WebSocket service. I created here a Maven module which has some dependencies. We will start an embedded Jetty server. Therefore, we depend on Jetty server, on the Jetty servlet, then on WebSocket server and the implementation of the WebSocket server for Jetty. As you may see here, I am using Jetty version 9.4.7. So, with this module created, I also created in the source main Java folder a server package, and I'm starting Jetty. I have a console application which takes the arguments for 2 ports from the command line, and it has some defaults. But as you may see, the idea is that I'm creating a web server and I start the server. I create a listener for delivering static web content and for delivering WebSocket services. Then I take commands from the command line, and the only command that I execute is exit to stop the server. Now, my web server is starting 2 servers. So when it starts, first it will stop. It has a list of servers, and when it's starting the web server for delivering static content, it's creating a Jetty web server to listen on this port, and it's creating a context handler to publish some handlers that will handle all the incoming requests starting with this prefix, and it's creating a resource handler, and this resource handler will have a default file in case you don't specify. You load the directory and you don't specify a path to a file, but you try to load the directory. It will try to see if the directory contains this file, and it will then deliver this as a response. The static resource handler will just load pages from the class path, and because the web application it is in the source main resources, this folder is not compiled, but it's copied at the same location with the binaries. So the binaries are in the class path, and I say to the static resource handler, load from the same directory where the binaries are, because also the web application will be there. Now we set the context on the context handler to be the resource handler. We set the handler actually, and then we set the handler of the server to be the context handler, and we start the server. In the end, we add the server to the list of servers just to be able to stop them when the server stops. When we when we start the web server sockets, this will create another server listening on a different port. With web services, with WebSocket services, you don't have the same issues like with Ajax calls to a cross domain. You are allowed to do a call on a different port, even on a different host, without having to ask for options and to have the course header set. So, because this is not a simple context handler, it will invoke a class to handle the requests. I'm creating a servlet context handler, and because each client will talk to a dedicated instance of the service on the server, I'm creating a context with session support. Then I say this context should intercept all the calls, and it's gonna be handled by this. The server is gonna use this handler. This is requested to be called at this point, just for the WebSocket server container initializer to be able to configure the context. If the context that's configured here doesn't belong to the server, is not set to be the handler of the server, this configuration call will not work. In the end, we register all the services that we expose by the type of the class. we start the server and then we add it to the started servers list. When we stop the servers, we stop all the started servers and then we clear the list. And because this is auto-closable, it also has a close method which actually calls the stop. It's like an alias. Now, in order to implement a service, we have two options, and we created a service here. One option would be to extend a dedicated class, and the other is to use annotations. I chose the last one because it is more flexible in the way that I don't have to implement a dedicated class, a specific class, and even the signature of the methods that I can attach to particular socket events, it's more flexible than having to override the method from an interface or a class. So what I'm implementing here, it's a simple talk application which will allow the clients to connect to the server and send messages. Now, as you may see here, I created the service class which has to be annotated with server endpoint annotation that specifies where the service is available. So this context should be concatenated with the one of the handler. That means that that's gonna be the root context, and this is all that we need to add. Now, because each client will have its own instance of this class that we'll talk to, and this will belong to the session of the client on the server side, we need to have a static member to collect all the client sessions. We need to intercept particular WebSockets events, like when the socket is started, we can ask for the session of the client. This argument is actually injected, so we can ask for a particular argument on the function. We don't have to override a certain signature of the method, but rather the container will inject what we request depending on what it has available in the execution context. So I created a method, I can call it whatever I like, but I have to annotate this with on open annotation to be invoked when a session is created for the first time. Because we may have different threads running in parallel, and some of them will try to add to the sessions list, the other will try to remove from it. We need to synchronize the access on the shared memory, and this is what we do here. When we accept a new session, we just add the session to the list. When a session gets closed, we will just remove it from the list. Whereas when we receive a message from a session, and we can take either a string message or a byte array, depending on what kind of protocol we use, if it's a text one or a binary one. Anyway, when we receive a message, this method will be called because it's annotated with onMessage annotation, and we just iterate on the list that we have with open sessions, and with each session we take back the remote connector to the client and just send a text message. This is a simple service, and here we have a testing web application. I created here a simple form. I'm using Twitter Bootstrap as the CSS, and I have a controller for the page. So here I have a divider which is decorated with the class from Twitter Bootstrap, and I have a heading, and as you may see, this is a form which doesn't submit to any function or endpoint, but nevertheless it has a text area that's read-only, just to output the messages, each message on a line, and then I have an input of type text, and this input is actually the one used to enter a message and then send it to the server. So when a user is typing on the input and then releases a key, this event will be fired up, and we will call our send function with the argument with the argument of the event that gets created. Now, I'm not going to show you the CSS. It's an old version of Twitter Bootstrap, but nevertheless. So I have a controller here, the one that's consuming the service on the server. What we need to do is to create a new WebSocket by calling the WebSocket function. And in here, I use WebSocket protocol schema, which is on top of HTTP, which is actually converting it's upgrading an HTTP connection to a more TCP/IP like connection on which I send and receive frames. So the WebSocket server is listening on the same host but on a different port, and we just connect to the service endpoint. Now, when we send a message, we just check if the key that gets pressed and released was an enter, and then we access by the ID the tag, we take the value entered by the user in the text field, and then we use the WebSocket that's connected to the server to just send the text. We also clear the value of the input so the user may enter a new one. Now, we have to subscribe to the onMessage event of the WebSocket. When we receive something from the server, the data received will be accessed via the data field of the event, of the argument of the method. And we just access the tag by the output, by the output ID, by the ID. And if we already have something there, then we add the line separator, and then we just concatenate the text. Now, let's just see the demo and how it works. First thing that we need to do is to start up our server. So let's just go in here, and this is our application, and just run this as a Java application. And I'm gonna start this console. And as you may see, it registered two listeners. One is for delivering static content, the other one we used for WebSocket. Now let's just start the HTML page, load the socket and send message. So I have started here my application. I have created two tabs, so I'm connected with two applications. And in here, as you may see, it's our simple UI. Let's say that we send a message to the server. Did you read it? Read me. Okay, and in this tab we already have the message sent, and we can say yes, we do. Okay, so this message was also broadcasted in here. As you may see, this is a simple service. If we go back to the code, it's quite easy, just starting an embedded Jetty and creating a class annotated with server endpoint, then annotate the methods for onOpen, onClose, and onMessage, and that's all. Thanks.